Proceed. I'll call to order the Thursday, October 8th, 2020 Watertown Plan Commission meeting. Can I get a roll call?
Aletsky.
Present.
Dargits Johnson.
Here.
Dolly.
Here.
Ford.
Here.
Culhane.
Here.
Kays.
Yeah, here.
And Hanson is absent. We have a quorum.
Thank you, Brandy. Item 3 on the agenda is invitation for public comment participant submittal. If you'd like to speak on something that's not on the agenda, you can sign up and we'll have a spot later on the agenda for that. Moving on to item 4, the approval of the agenda. Do I have a motion?
I'll make that motion to approve the agenda.
Second.
I have a second. Second by Rhonda. Any discussion on that? Any changes to the agenda?
We can wait. I think, yeah,
Okay.
let's just wait.
We'll take a vote.
Okay, Aletsky.
Yes.
Dargits Johnson.
Yes.
Dolly.
Yes.
Ford.
Yes.
Culhane.
Yes.
Kays.
Yes.
Motion's approved. Moving on, item 5 is the approval of the minutes from the September 24th, 2020 meeting. Have we reviewed those minutes? Do I have a motion to approve?
I'll make the motion to approve the minutes.
I have a motion. Do I have a second?
Ford seconds with a correction.
All right.
Bill isn't mentioned here as either present or absent.
Okay, so he came in during the Board of Adjustment meeting, which we had the Board of Adjustment after the Plan Commission last week.
Yes.
But so we should just have him as absent.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. At what point? Because just from my quick glance. Okay, so just on top there. So absent. Okay, I'll make sure to add because then for the other action items, then he is included. But I'll make sure to get him added to the roll call. That's the part you were looking at, Diana?
It is.
Okay. Perfect. Thank you.
Any other corrections that we need to make to those? Okay, we'll go ahead and take a vote on that.
Aletsky.
Yes.
Dargits Johnson.
Yes.
Dolly.
Yes.
Ford.
Yes.
Culhane.
Yes.
Kays.
Abstain.
Motion's approved. Moving on to item 6, regular agenda, 6A, resolution number 2020-37.
Okay, thank you, Blake. So this is the amendment to Chapter 2406 subdivision procedure of the revised ordinances of the City of Watertown. As you know, this is one that we've been working on quite heavily with the Development Task Force group put together by WDC, Chris Shilkin as the director. And so we heard this at the September 10th Plan Commission meeting, and there were just a handful of housekeeping items to amend and revise. So we did table it at that meeting to be brought back on the October 8th meeting, which then again, staff recommends that we table it until October 22nd. And we were able to get public notice out, and what you'll see on the screen here, and you guys on Teams, you can see this.
Yep.
So the yellow highlights were what came from the September 10th discussion, and then the blue highlights are just from staff combing through it. Once again, just making sure that everything's covered so we can try to get a good start to this ordinance amendment. Well, we have a good start, but just to make sure that everything is looked at diligently and to make sure that we're not missing anything. So you'll see that there was quite a bit added, I think for the better, think it's things that, you'll notice in the concept plan, just things that we would want to be seeing. And so the concept plan is what's going to come to the Plan Commission for a public hearing. So if there's anything else that you guys can think of that you would like to see, because that's the main portion that's going to affect the Plan Commission. And then so that's where too, if we table this, then it gives us an extra, just some extra time to really dive into it and make sure that we're covering all the bases. And so what I'll do too, since Bonnie and Rhonda are in the audience, then I gave them a copy, and then I will email one out though to the rest of you so that you can look through it and see all of the blue highlights along with the yellow highlights, but just trying to be as thorough as possible. So I think if we just have a little more time, and like I said, we were able to get public notice in for October 22nd because we also do want to keep this moving as people, as developers are planning their projects for next spring, just so we can get this on the books, and so we're not in this limbo period of this is our ordinance today, but this is what we're hoping to amend it to. So with that, are there any questions?
Randy?
Yep.
I had a quick question, comment. Under 240603 concept plan and 240605 preliminary plan, we added in there hard copies and electric submittal of PDF and DWG files. I would also suggest that you put the word term GIS shape files in there as well, so that we're not having to convert the DWGs into a GIS shape file for the city's project. So if we can get those concept plans from the engineers and in a GIS format, it's just a lot easier than having to do some conversions.
Sounds good. Because is that something that they'll just convert that from their DWG?
Yep. So if
Okay.
they just convert the DWG into a shape file, as long as they have the right projection coordinate projection system, and then all we can do then we'll just lay it into your project.
Okay, yeah, perfect. We will get
Mr.
that
Chair,
added.
I have a couple of questions. This is
Yes,
Ford.
Diana.
I don't have the blue stuff and I can't really see it on my screen very well, Brandy, so I might give you the wrong numbers. But one thing I just need some clarification on in my own mind, and you're right there at 240605. Under the major changes for proposed variances. So I just need to look at the flow here. So does this say that before this proposed variance that wasn't included in the original concept plan, before it could go any farther down and eventually reach the Board of Adjustment, it has to come back to the Plan Commission to be included as a proposed variance?
Yep,
That's correct, right?
that is
Yeah, so
correct.
that was a gap we had talked about last meeting, Diana, where
Okay.
if they didn't disclose them at the front through the concept plan that the board sees or the Plan Commission sees, and then wanted to change something later on in the process, what we're saying here is that constitutes a major change if they wanted to, variance from the design standards around streets or something along those lines, that it would have to then necessitate it coming back to the Plan Commission.
Thank you. And that's what I remember talking about, but I wanted to be sure that that's actually what it said. So thank you. And I have one more other question. In additional impact requirements, 240607.
Yep, and I have that.
And the
pulled up.
word, I guess it's the Public Works Director or assigned person may require any or all of the following. And I'm wondering why we wouldn't just require those. The estimate of the vehicular traffic, but especially the information on additional water or sewer loads. And I'm wondering why that's a may instead of a requirement. To me, it seems like that's information that would be pretty important, especially the water and sewer loads.
Mr. Chairman, if I could speak to that, please.
Yes, sir.
So great question, Commissioner Ford. One point of clarity there, as far as the sewer loading goes, I believe in our subsequent prelim plan requirements, we do ask for detailed information regarding the amount of sewer loading, sanitary sewer loading on our system. I think that what the additional information section is getting at is if we see something that's abnormal, that where we suspect there's going to be potential issues, the engineer's office could require even more information than the basic contributing flows from the development. And but I believe the contributing flows from the development and the adequacy of the current sanitary sewer system are both requirements in the sanitary sewer plan as it sits right now. And then the additional information would be requested if we see some abnormalities or some unique loading situations to the sanitary sewer system.
And does that same explanation apply to the vehicular traffic also?
Yeah, so good question. On the street side of things and the transportation side of things, I don't believe that the street section requires any traffic data. It does require that the streets be built to the master transportation plan or the comprehensive land use plan. I don't know if it explicitly says that, but by administration, that's what we do is require, I think, Part H there, transportation connectivity. We do require administratively that they follow suit with what our comp plan shows and what our master transportation plan shows. We could add that to this section for clarity as well. Now, as far as the additional information, going to the extent of requiring a traffic impact analysis, that does, I won't say it's a significant cost, but it is a cost to the developer to do a full-blown TIA. A traffic impact analysis will look at the trips generated from the site. It'll look at the existing road network and determine if any negative traffic impacts are occurring from the development. What I've seen other communities do is they'll, instead of, ours is kind of loosely written right now. It says the Public Works Director may require. Other communities will put a trigger in there that says if you're over X number of vehicles per day, anticipated traffic generation from your development, you are required to provide a traffic impact analysis. That's something that we could look at or entertain doing if the commission felt that would be appropriate. It does make our job a little easier because it's not as subjective for the city engineer to pick and choose who has to do a TIA, but it's definitive based on the amount of traffic being generated from the development. And that number can be derived from traffic generation manuals. So we know if there's a hotel going in of a certain number of rooms being rented, it's easy enough for the developer's engineer to go to those traffic generation manuals and see that it's likely they're going to exceed either a certain peak hour traffic generation or a certain overall a daily traffic generation. Long story short, we could put a trigger in there that more clearly defines when that TIA is required. And then when they're underneath that, we don't worry about it because we feel that our street system is adequate already the way it is, presumably, based on where the development is going and the zoning that it's in. But that's one idea that we can entertain.
What kind of trigger would you think there, Heath? Is that like a square footage trigger or?
No, it's typically, again, based on the use and what that use is anticipated to generate for additional traffic. And that all comes back into those traffic generation manuals. So they in there they have listed a hotel, for example. And if the hotel is of a certain size or a certain number of rooms, it's expected in those manuals that X amount of traffic is going to be generated from that development. And they'll have other uses in there too, like a convenience store or strip mall or a gas station. And each one of those uses then, based on traffic models over the years that have been accumulated through traffic studies, they have a model that they indicate in those manuals of what the expected trip generations would be from that development. And then that's what would be used to trigger this requirement. We would have the designers tell us what their anticipated generated traffic is, And if it exceeds a trigger point that we put in here, we would then require a TIA.
I like the idea of a trigger. I think, as you said, it makes it more objective and less subjective. And I think that's the whole point of a lot of this, is to just give developers a clear idea of what exactly is expected of them.
And we do have that information a little more in depth within the engineering design standards that were adopted. So here you'll see that it does kind of lay out for traffic studies. And I was looking for this, so I kind of zoned out what Heath was saying. But at least that we do have some things that are adopted that we would fall back on.
Yeah, that's a great point, Brandy. So if you scroll back up there to 5.112, that is a primary example that we already have in our design standards that has those triggers listed. And that one looks like it's specific to non-residential development, trip generation, the peak hours expected to exceed 100 vehicles, or any residential development with 150 or more dwelling units. So those are two different ways. One's based on the number of dwelling units for residential development. The other one's based on the expected peak hour traffic generation.
Thank you for digging that out, Brandy.
Yes, I thought we had it in the toolbox.
Would it make sense then from our ordinance to make reference to this document here, or would there be additional language that you'd want to incorporate into the ordinance?
I think we as staff could review what's in Chapter 5 of the engineering standards and make sure that we're comfortable with that, and that it seems to be commonplace for communities like Watertown. And if we're confident in that, I think you're absolutely right, Mr. Chairman, that we could incorporate that by reference by simply referring to the engineering design standards. These are, I will note, these are all great comments, and this is one of the reasons staff and I talked about postponing this and have worked together. I want to commend staff, Brandy particularly, for her dedication in this, and we want to see this through to completion sooner than later. We definitely don't want to postpone it another meeting, but just where we're at with our staffing loads, which is something I was going to touch on a little bit later here in the meeting under new business, and I will still do that. But commending Brandy for the work she's done, but also want to just step back, catch our breath, and make sure we get this right out of the gates so that everything's covered. So I would encourage, whether yet tonight or throughout the next week, week and a half, if any of the commissioners had any comments or questions like this, please send them Brandy's way, and we'll definitely take them into consideration. And it's really not that long of a section. It is, and if once you read it a couple times, you kind of get the flow of what this process is going to look like, and it's easy to start picking out and imagining in your mind for each one of those steps of the process whether we're missing the mark on anything and whether there's something more we should be adding to it. So we'll definitely take comments as long as you have them and get them incorporated.
Yeah, I certainly agree and appreciate that. So I echo those comments and appreciate the engagement and dynamic conversation on this. Definitely want to get it right. So I don't think we need to rush into anything.
Will you be emailing this out tomorrow, Brandy? Is that what you said?
Yes.
Okay, thanks. That's great.
Yep. Yeah, so then you guys have time to really digest it and go through it too. And we appreciate everything that you guys have put into it as well. It's been a joint effort for sure.
Is there any additional comments on this, or we do need a motion, I guess, to postpone this until the October 22nd meeting?
So
Ford seconds.
I don't think we have a motion yet at this point, Diana.
Case moves.
Yes, we did.
Okay, Kay's moved and then Diana seconds?
Yes.
Perfect. I missed that part. Sorry about that.
Well, he didn't come through very clearly. I think it was a little broken up.
Okay. Technology challenges.
They said it
All
at
right.
the same time, but Diana adjusted well.
Gotcha. All right, if there's no additional comments on that, we'll take a vote on that motion.
Aletsky,
Yes.
Dargis Johnson,
Yes.
Dolly,
Yes.
Ford,
Yes.
Colhane,
Yes.
Kays.
Yes.
All right, motion passes. Thank you. We'll move on to item 6B on the agenda, is 2020-54.
Yes, thank you, Blake. So this is a zoning text amendment to Chapter 2173, Landscape and Lighting Standards of the Revised Ordinances of the City of Watertown. And so you'll see this is just a minor amendment so what you guys will see coming forward to are any of these low-hanging fruits that we want to bring forward just to have it in the books and have it make sense, and also for protection where we didn't have this necessarily, it wasn't explicit before. So you'll see that, I'm not sure why it changed colors, why some of it's red and some of it's blue, but yards shall be graded. So this is under the standards for landscape materials. And then you'll see we talk about tree placement, the installation, minimum soil requirements. And then this states then that yards shall be graded to allow proper drainage according to the approved grading plan and shall be permanently seeded with an acceptable residential grass mix approved by the building inspector at the time the certificate of occupancy is issued. An appropriate extension, not to exceed 8 months, will be allowed when seasonal limitations prevent seeding. So this is just to make sure that at the time the certificate of occupancy is being issued, that the lawn is also being established, because sometimes we see building projects get closed out and then the lawn is never finalized, and so sometimes it comes back. It's vegetated, it just might not be grass, it might be weeds. So
Do we have a listing of what those acceptable residential grass mixes are?
We don't. I mean, it would be your typical mix of Kentucky bluegrass, or if people wanted to use natives.
It's
I
just
guess-
if we include the term acceptable residential grass mix, I think it implies that we have a list of acceptable residential grass mixes.
And I think we could easily make that list and just have it be by policy instead of in ordinance. And then so we could provide that information potentially with the building permit. We provide the sediment, the erosion sediment control measures that should take place, and then we also could add that to the list too to say. But yeah, typically as long as, if they want to do Kentucky bluegrass, or if they want to do like blue grama or fescues, whatever, long as it was something that was acceptable. I don't know, unless there's a better word that anybody has.
I like your comparison there, Brandy, to the best management practices that we administer for the stormwater regulations. We generally call out what are acceptable BMPs, and then we list and give examples of industry standards that meet the general BMP requirements, depending on the situation of erosion and sediment control that they're trying to accomplish on the site. So that could be one way to handle this seeding by policy as well, is to create a list by policy of what's an acceptable residential seed mix.
I was just going to look here too, because I almost think that one of the manuals might call that out. That's not what I
Well,
wanted there.
Randy's looking for that. I'll add a little bit of context here. What generated this ordinance amendment was primarily stemming back to recent residential development where individual residential lots were not getting seeded with an appropriate grass lawn seeding that we would expect to see in our community. So our ordinance doesn't get specific to require that. What our ordinance is specific on is vegetative cover to meet the national stormwater regulations. Well, the national stormwater regulations are very vague and at a high level of vegetative cover being 70% covered in any vegetation, really. It could be weeds, grass, bushes, shrubs, trees. Vegetative cover that would hold the soil in place is the goal and intent of the stormwater regulations. But now here we're drilling down a little deeper to say, okay, here's our intent on a residential lot. What kind of vegetative cover is required, i.e. the grass seeding specification. And so what it also does is put a timeline and a restriction on when that needs to be accomplished. And I wanted to point this out too, just so the board is in agreement that it's not too tight of a timeline and it's not too generous of a timeline. Right now, we're saying the seating needs to be in place at the time of a certificate of occupancy for a new residential building. If that CO is issued during the winter months, when you obviously can't plant grass, we would entertain an extension of up to 8 months to see that grass seeding accomplished. So I did want to point that time frame out that this new language includes. It makes the homeowner, the home builder, be responsible to get that grass seed in either at the time of CO or within 8 months after a winter season when it's prohibited from being accomplished.
So before that, you know, if you can see it's too late in the fall to plant, do you also going to make them so that they landscape the lot and slope it so you have a positive flow away from the home where it's ready to be seeded somewhat with the dirt? No dirt piles is what I'm saying, because sometimes you see some of them dirt piles just go on and on and on. Yeah, I'm going to get to that, and it never happens.
Yes, and I believe, Stacy, I don't know if you have the top of your head, but I believe the overlot grading is one of the checklists on the building inspector's form that they look at the time of closeout and their final inspection.
Yes, I believe so. That is on the inspector's list to check.
Yeah, I think it's a good call that, you know, we include some language about ensuring that it is seeded and that we don't have that perpetual issue of noxious weeds, you know, growing in these new communities. My only thing is it's around that word acceptable, because I think that implies then that we're determining whether or not different types of grass mixes are allowed within the community. If we're going to include the word acceptable, I think we need to refer to what grass mixes are acceptable. But I'm not necessarily opposed to just removing the word acceptable and just saying residential grass mix. Do we need to be in the business here of determining exactly what types of grass can get planted?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, from a staffing standpoint, I think that would be that would meet the intent of accomplishing what we're trying to with this ordinance, as far as your proposal goes.
To add residential.
Just leave it simply as residential and strike the acceptable.
Okay.
Correct, Mr. Chair?
Yeah, I think that's a better language there. If we don't have a specific list of what types they can use, as long as it is a residential grass mix, then I think we're good.
Sounds good.
Maybe I'm nitpicking too much. I don't know, but that's the way it read to me anyway.
Now's the time to be a little nitpicky.
Yeah, and it just, I mean, it raises the question of what is acceptable, so that's a good catch.
Any additional questions or comments on this one? This is a public hearing item, right?
Yes, yes.
I don't believe I've opened the public hearing, so I'll open that now if there's anybody here to speak on behalf or against.
No, there's nobody in the audience.
There's nobody there. All right, I don't see anybody on the teams either. So I'll close the public hearing. We will need a motion on this.
I'll make a motion to approve as amended.
Maybe just say
Motion
striking
to approve
acceptable.
with the striking the word acceptable, is that correct?
Yes, thank you.
I'll second.
And a second. Any additional discussion? Okay, take a vote.
Aletsky,
Yes.
Dargis Johnson,
Yes.
Dolly,
Yes?
Ford,
Yes.
Culhane,
Yes.
Kays.
Yes.
Motion passes. Moving on to item 7 is open public comments. I don't think there's anybody there, so we'll move on to new business.
And none that I have, but I think Heath, unless you wanted to talk on that at old.
Old.
Okay.
Old business?
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
Chair. Oh,
Oh, go ahead, Matt.
I had some new business, so I didn't get a chance to run this by Brandy because we played some phone tag, but I meet pretty frequently with the Animal Control Board, and we've recently been discussing some issues regarding how kennels are regulated, and the topic of the number of animals allowed kind of came up for discussion, and it was the consensus of that group was that we shouldn't be regulating the number of animals, number of pets allowed. We should be, which we already do, regulate the effects that may occur if somebody had too many animals pooping in your neighbor's yard, etc. In that discussion, we discovered that in the zoning ordinance, under the definitions, there's a definition of kennel that if you read that and then look to see that the word kennel is only in the ag zone, you could reach the conclusion that the only place in town you could have 4 or more dogs is in the ag zone. Now, it was my understanding that there were some folks historically in the building services department that may have actually believed that that was the case, and but I don't. My understanding is that was not intended to be true, but I can't say because I wasn't around when that was passed. So, bottom line is the Animal Control Board is recommending to this board that you consider amending the definition of kennel to more specifically refer to commercial kennel, and basically removing the word owned would more or less take care of the issue, but we could also tweak it a little further. There's a pretty good definition of commercial kennel in Rapid City's ordinance I saw. But essentially, I just wanted to bring that up for discussion to see what your thoughts were on that. And then if you're amenable to that, we would bring it forward at a future plan commission meeting for formal action.
So Matt, I missed the first part of your discussion. You're saying that the Animal Control Board doesn't want to regulate the number of people, number of dogs a person can have in their backyard?
Correct. You know, there was some discussion about it. I know the mayor weighed in a little bit with the board, and the consensus was that folks don't necessarily want to regulate the absolute number of pets, but we will continue to.
I could have 12 black labs in my neighbor, and the neighbor could have 12 black labs. Then you have 50 dogs within 100 feet of each other.
Yeah, you know, that was the consensus, was that we would regulate the effects of having lots of dogs if there were any. There's loud barking dog tickets that can be written. There's defecating on property that's not yours, et cetera, et cetera. There's just general nuisance laws that can be enforced if there's too much barking going on. But the thought was that if somebody has 10 dogs and nobody knows they have 10 dogs, then maybe there's not an issue. And so
how many places in the city of Watertown where there's somebody that's got more than 10 dogs that the neighbors don't know about it, but the neighbors are too afraid to say something about it because they still got to live there after the cops come? I think that's the reason that you have that number is there, so that you don't have those types of situations, because in today's society, most neighbors, they just harbor ill will when those types of things, because they're afraid to go talk to the neighbor. And I'm not against dogs or anything like that, but I'm just saying, I think that's the reason or the basis for having a restriction on the number of animals.
But I think the point that Matt raised about, so the kennel's referred to in the ordinance here, but then it's only called out in the ag district in relation to a usage. And so it implies that, what we're talking about here is a commercial kennel usage, and that the only area or zone within town that we're allowing a commercial kennel usage is the ag district. So it's not necessarily the effect that you're speaking of there, Mr. Case.
Well, yeah,
I don't know. I think that might be true, but it says owned. It says owned, boarded, raised, bred, or offered for sale. And I think that's where
correct. So as you read that right now, if you have 4 or more, if you own 4 or more dogs, the only place in town you could do that, potentially, you could interpret it as in the ag zone with conditional use.
This is very common language that you see in many municipalities across the state.
I would just let you know that Rapid City's definition of kennel is specific to commercial kennels. There are communities around the country, of course, that regulate the number of pets people can have, but it's not real common in this part of the country.
But in the case of that one, we're talking about the kennel as a conditional use. It's less a structure or an accessory structure in use on the property and more of a type of use, right? So we're talking about the commercial aspect in that regard. If we were referencing the definition and referring to it as an accessory structure and what could go on there and setbacks and so forth, then I would see it more in line with that control aspect throughout the community.
I
So
think
it seems like we have a gap either way.
I think when I read the ordinance and it says that we can have in the residential zone principal structures and all accessory uses which are common and incidental to those principal structures, and I would say most people would agree that a kennel is an incidental accessory use permissible in a residential zone. And so what the rest of part of that definition section of the ordinance is stipulating is that you can have a kennel as an incidental accessory use in a residential zone, but you're going to be limited to the number of animals within that kennel, because the more animals that you have confined in an area where the possibility of having serious numbers of animals confined within a close proximity of one another, causing nuisance types issues, are going to be greatly exacerbated the more animals that your individual is allowed to have.
What
I think
about chickens?
that's the basis for that section of the zoning ordinance. And as somebody that's read thousands of zoning ordinances over the last 30 years, this is a very common rule and regulation in most communities.
But does this also go for chickens and rabbits and all the other types of pets that people have, or are we talking just dogs?
I don't want to get into the discussion of whether or not you can have chickens in the city because you have conflicting ordinances in the city right now. If we keep the discussion on kennels, I think yes, it's difficult to enforce, and we handle it primarily by complaint right now, but I think there's a basis and a reason for it.
Mr. Chairman, I just wanted to note, I see Mayor Karen has her hand up for comment.
Yes, Madam Mayor.
Yes, thank you. I just wanted to say this is something that you're not going to get complete agreement on. There should be a debate, and the staff has struggled to understand what the meaning is. And it's been, some people think it means one thing, some people thinks it means another thing. And I think it would be good to clarify it and let the community decide whether we think that 3 or more cats or dogs is illegal. And I think it's an excellent topic for debate, and I think we should allow the debate to see if we need to change our ordinance.
So is the proposal here to bring forth some specific language, or what's the proposal, Matt?
Yeah, the proposal would be to bring forth just an edit essentially to the definition of kennel, striking the word owned and maybe adding some language to more specifically refer to commercial kennels, maybe even retitle it commercial kennel. So then the conditional use of kennel or commercial kennel in the ag zone would align with kind of what the Animal Control Board was thinking was the intention there, was that commercial operations, if you're raising pets for sale on a regular basis, you're boarding pets, et cetera, that should be confined to the conditional use of an ag zone. But where the confusion arose was, if you read that and you see the word owned, you could read it to mean that your house with 5 dogs in it in the R zone is a kennel and is not allowed in that zone.
Yeah, and I think either way, whichever way we want to interpret it or whichever way, we want to decide is the rule of law, I think it needs to be clarified. And so it does seem like we should, propose some additional language, some clarifying language one way or another, and then have a public hearing and open debate and discuss it there.
I do like where Matt was going with that. It can be regulated on a complaint basis if you have more than 3 dogs, because I think that, I mean, pets are like children to some people, so regulating it might not be necessary in ordinance.
Well, Mr. Chair, I would add too that,
Remember that, Brandy, when I lived next door to you with 127 cats?
To Commissioner Kay's point, I would reiterate too that, maybe the solution is a hybrid one where we better define the intent of the kennel definition as a commercial use, but then also put restrictions in there on private ownership of a number of pets. Maybe
That's
there's a
kinda where
hybrid
I was
solution that
thinking, too.
we would evolve that through discussion and debate.
If we had both defined, I think it would take all that ambiguity away from there, a residential kennel versus a commercial kennel.
Agreed.
Well, I would just tell you that the Animal Control Board's consensus is that the number of pets anywhere in town shouldn't be regulated. So I think that they would like to come and have that discussion, but they would not advocate for a number of pets regulation, according to the last conversation I had with them.
So they're saying, no, they don't care the number, or they should be limited to a certain number, or should not be?
Should not be.
Should be self-regulated. Too many cats.
But
I agree with your comments, Todd, that self-regulation is very difficult in this day and age when you're trying to get along with your neighbors. The people that own a large amount of pets oftentimes think their pets are part of their family and wonderful, and that just because they're pooping in their neighbor's yard, they think that's just fine. And I've experienced that myself. So I would be hard pressed not to have a limit of some sort.
Yeah, I don't see any reason why we wouldn't have the discussion, though. I mean,
Right.
it's something that we can all talk about and welcome the opinions and discourse from the Animal Control Board as well. To Madam Mayor's point, this should be something that we review as a community and make the determination on it. It certainly is not clear the way that it's written. I mean, I'm interpreting it differently than Todd is interpreting it, and I'm sure everybody's got their opinions here. So let's try to clean things up.
On the flip side, though, has it caused any issues or problems? There hasn't been any legal lawsuits over this. So I'm on that perspective, I'm not exactly certain what it's hurting.
So where the discussion started was in Chapter 3, which is the Animal Control Ordinance. There is the definition of kennel is also there, but it does not include the word owned. And the reference to kennel in that ordinance has to do with a kennel being more than 25 feet from your neighbor. And the concern has been that there are many parts of town where that would be impossible to have an outdoor kennel. Now talking about the structure, an actual structure of a kennel, more than 25 feet. So there's going to be a proposal from the Animal Control Board sent up to the City Council to strike the word kennel completely from Chapter 3, and this is going to be called a dog house. And so there will be no more confusion with two definitions of kennel in our ordinance.
But isn't that really a zoning issue too? Because it's a structure, and why is that in the animal ordinance when it should actually be a zoning function? Because all structures are regulated by the zoning ordinance, and so that's where I think maybe there's some cross contamination and cross code within the city where you've got zoning functions intermingled and intertwined in various other safety or regulations and animal regulations and nuisance regulations when much of it are all zoning functions, and so we need to decide which hat should be worn by which person and who's actually having the oversight on that.
Yep.
Bring it forward.
Sounds good. And then Heath, do you have old business?
Yes, Mr. Chair, if you're ready for old business.
Yep.
I was just going to provide the board a brief update on staffing levels and staffing work assignments and things of that nature. We've talked briefly about this in the past since we've made the transition to a community development division, in which case we've hired a community development manager and Stacy in the function she's performing. And we've transferred Brandy as the urban planner from underneath the city engineer over underneath the community development manager, so that we got the planning and zoning function back together again, so to speak. And with that, we're currently faced with some staffing shortfalls, and wanted to just update everybody on the status of that. We currently still have 2 vacant positions, one of which we've just recently performed some interviews on, and we hope to extend an offer soon. That is for the permit technician that will be essentially doing a lot of administrative assistance in the office upstairs on the 2nd floor, but also some of the minor permitting like fences and decks and sheds and doghouses or kennels perhaps. But things of that nature that don't take as a robust of a structural analysis for the permit. And so that was done by design to help with that type of permit flow upstairs and processing those permits while still having some administrative support on receiving in building permit applications in general, and filing and sorting and processing them as well. The second position that's still vacant and still advertised is building specialist, and that was kind of a hybrid approach between the building official and our former building service specialist job descriptions. And in that, we have what we're looking for is really, it's a more technical end of it with somebody with some code knowledge, like somebody with a construction management type background, whether by practice or by degree. And it is a little more difficult position to fill just because of the high demand for those types of individuals in the building industry. But we are doing what we can to get that position filled as well. The reason I'm explaining all this is because of a division of 6 staff members. When you're down 2 key positions like that do the brunt of the permitting, I could talk all night about commending the current staff and the weight that they're pulling upstairs and fielding phone calls and issuing permits and trying to keep up with the processes, and it's an all hands on deck situation right now. So with that being said, we are trying to scale back on some of the extra things, some of the fluff, if you will, that we'd love to do as a planning, community development type division, and really having to focus on the walk-in customers and the building permits that are being requested and applied for. That's priority 1 right now for community development is the building permits and the commercial site plan reviews. They're all a function of that community development division. So with that, I know there's at times frustration if the board hears any angst or concerns. Please feel free to approach Stacy or myself with those, and we'll certainly try to address them as quick as we can. But I assure you, we are trying to process permits as vigilantly, as diligently as possible, and are also currently utilizing consultant services through a third-party architect to help with the proficiency of those reviews due to the staffing levels being short like they are. And we've gone through a couple of larger commercial site building permit submittals that they have really turned around in a quick manner for us, and we're really appreciative of their work as well. That consultant is TSP, by the way, that we have a contract with for their assistance in those reviews. And then on the engineering side of things, which the board doesn't necessarily see as much of, but they are definitely connected to the development side of things, whether it be residential development or commercial sites where there's public improvements involved. That's where the city engineering office gets involved. And that side too, we are currently shorthanded. We have between COVID and vacancies, between these 2 divisions, we've had up to 5 vacancies out of a 12-member staff between community development and engineering at one time. And so you can imagine taking those 12 positions and cutting them almost in half. That's kind of how we're taxed at this point in time right now. But we do have an engineer 2 position posted as well, and that's an engineer in training level position. Again, very hard to fill. Those positions are high in demand. along with a licensed surveyor that's also posted, and also very hard to fill, very hard in demand, high in demand. So I just wanted to provide some context there and an update on the staffing levels and where we're at in community development and engineering divisions of Public Works. And again, would encourage the board to contact either Stacy or myself if you hear of any concerns or any issues that need to be addressed. We'd be glad to help work through that with a board member or a citizen or customer. And that's all I had, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate that time to give you guys an update on that.
Yeah, thank you, Heath. Understand the difficulty that you're facing. I really appreciate the update there. Hopefully we can get those positions filled sooner rather than later.
And if anybody has any
Understand the
friends or
difficulty.
colleagues or anybody in those fields, feel free to send them to the city's website and check out those job descriptions that are posted.
I'll be thinking about it. Any additional old business?
I don't believe so.
All righty. Any reason for executive session?
Nope.
And I'll take a motion to adjourn.
I'll make that motion to adjourn.
Second.
Okay, we'll take a vote.
Aletsky.
Yes.
And happy birthday shout out to Bonnie.
Thank you.
We didn't keep her too late. Dargis Johnson.
Yes.
Dolly.
Yes.
Ford.
Yes.
Culhane.
Yes.
And Kays.
Yes.
All right, thank you, everyone.